Thomas's new voice was alright. It actually made him sound like a young Engine, which is good. And I was a bit surprised that they used Keith Wickham's performance as the Fat Controller in the US version. I don't really understand why. I hear most people say that the UK and US versions of Gordon and the Fat Controller, also Topham Hatt, in both versions, Gordon and the Fat Controller sound so similar because they're both played by the same actors. I actually am glad that we got a bit of both in The Adventure Begins. We get Keith Wickham's performance as the Fat Controller and the US version of Gordon in this. And James's new voice, I must say, it is an improvement from James's US voice from previous episodes. It's a big improvement. I actually like James's new voice. It sort of sounds similar to Yorkie from The Big Garage. Yeah, remember that show? The Big Garage? The one with the colourful taxis and the talking pumping station? Also, the breakdown train. They've brought that back as well. But one thing that bugged me a bit when I first found out about it is giving the breakdown trains faces and names. Jerome and Judy. I actually didn't mind Henrietta having a face because it made sense, because she didn't have a face in season 2, and how could she be talking if she didn't have a face? And plus 2, it makes sense because now that I know that Toby isn't a maniac talking to her brake coach all the time, even though she doesn't have a face, and stuff like that. But why would you give the breakdown cranes faces? I really didn't mind when I watched the special, but when I first heard that about Jerome and Judy, it just bugged me a bit. But you get used to things as time goes on, and now I'm starting to get used to Jerome and Judy right now. And there's also another new character. The one that they made a Trackmaster version, Trackmaster toy of this character before he was even seen. And that is Glyn, the coffee pot engine. We hear a little bit of backstory about before Thomas has given his own branch line, the branch line was run by Glyn, the coffee pot engine, and a lot of other coffee pot engines as well. But as time went on, the coffee pot engines, I'm not exactly sure what happened to them, but they were gone, except for one, Glyn. And he's been left in a siding at Farquhar. And plus 2, he was hardly mentioned or seen in this special. And that did bug me. I was kind of curious curious as to how Glyn was gonna be in this story. He wasn't featured in the Railway series, so I was actually curious as to what Glyn had to do in this story, but we hardly saw him. we hear Edward talking about Glenn to Thomas in the beginning, and then we actually see him at the very end. Who, by the way, has Skarloey's voice, which I'm... Glennish Welsh. Old. I kind of like the discussion that Glenn and Thomas have at the very end. It's like, I'm Thomas. Well, nice to meet you, Thomas. You shall run this branch line well, with pride. I will, Mr. Coffee Pot. I kinda like that. It's like a father handing over his job to his son. I really like that. And, the whole Henry not in his old shape thing, I was kind of expecting that. I mean, it's Arc Productions we're talking about. I mean, sure, they can't come up with every single thing for one special. You can't have everything. I mean, I don't think you've noticed, but we don't get the classic version of Titmus Sheds. You know, when it had 6 births instead of 7. From season 1 to 8, Titmus Sheds had 6 births for 6 engines. But then it was demolished in Calling All Engines and then rebuilt, but it had an additional 7th birth for Emily. You remember that? But in The Adventure Begins, Titmus Sheds had 7 births instead of 6. I didn't notice it until I watched the special the second time watching it. But I didn't really mind. You can't have everything. That does not apply for Super Mega Force, however. And the CGI recreations of scenes, like Gordon pulling Thomas with the Express, and Thomas pulling a train, and Thomas's runaway train from the trucks, and also something that wasn't in the TV series, and I don't think was from the Railway series either. To prove how useful he can be, he chases after James when his brakes caught fire, and in a runaway, he actually tries to chase after James to try to stop the runaway train. That's actually a nice touch. I mean, yeah, I like that. It's Thomas trying to prove that he can be really useful by being as useful as he can be, and trying to stop James from crashing, which by the way didn't work, but it was a really nice move. I mean, he's trying to prove how useful he can be by trying to stop a runaway. And speaking of which, James's crash into the cow field. Holy fucking shit! It was amazing! The animation of the crash, it's amazing! I mean, this goes right up there with the crash from James to the Rescue. It was that amazing! It was animated superbly, and I really felt sorry for James after he crashed. But then again, the thing that kind of killed that moment is the guard popping out of the brake van and going, "I'm A-okay." Luckily, no one was hurt. The brake van tipped over on its side. How can the guard just climb out of the brake van without a scratch? Are you afraid to show people getting hurt in this show?